that team. 9 out of the 10 workshops are done. The action plans are now being written through follow-up calls. All of the workshops ended up being virtual this year, except there was one in March that was held in person before everything went bananas. Some of the communities have received their action plans and are starting to think about funding streams that can help them achieve their goals. And Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, who presented to you all yesterday, actually provided seed money for 4 communities to help implement their plans. So a really nice example of kind of those public-private partnerships and an ability to stack funds and resources. They're looking to advertise their next call for proposals, possibly in May or April. That's very tentative right now. I think most stuff is. And they are also discussing ways to revise some of the language in the RFA to ensure that they get more diversity in their applications and to make sure that they're also creating recreation opportunities for all of the community. And then my last slide is about the Great American Outdoors Act. Next slide, please. I know you all talked about LWCF yesterday. I just wanted to talk briefly about the money that is going to the land management agencies under the Great American Outdoors Act. The Restore Our Parks Act is going to provide $9.5 billion in dedicated funding for public lands deferred maintenance backlog. For the Forest Service, what that means is that for the next 5 fiscal years, we'll be getting $285 million a year to deal with these, to deal with our maintenance backlog. In the Forest Service, we're just wrapping up gathering our list of FY22 projects. That was sort of in conjunction with the proposed president's budget for FY22. FY21 is pretty much already in the can. But what we have been told is that, you know, even though the FY21 projects are already established, when the new administration comes in, they will obviously want to review those and review the implementation. But again, you know, this relates back to the states and our communities, because at least the funds that are going to the Forest Service, a heavy priority is going to be given to projects that have public support, can leverage funding and resources from our partners, which includes, you know, state governments and anybody else, and also to help ensure sustainability of our infrastructure for the future. And where we are right now is we're submitting a plan on how we intend to implement the FY21 funds. We have 30 days from when the budget was approved, which was December 28th. So by January 28th, we will be submitting our plans on how to implement the FY21 funds. And then Congress will have 45 days to sort of do some back and forth and approve the implementation plan. And so we are looking at getting our FY21 deferred maintenance funds in the middle of March this year. So, and then for FY22, you know, we're still working on that. The budget list was prepared and submitted when, you know, we had to submit the presidential budget. And I think that those are pretty much locked in too, but there is still opportunity. I think there's still, we were talking before the call about the need for contracting with outside organizations, and that's you guys. And so there are lots of opportunities, and then we still have the last 3 years of this act that have to be programmed. So it's a good time to get started having those conversations with your local forests about projects that you think are important and how, you know, you can leverage your resources with what the Forest Service has. And then there's a good shot that they will end up on the list in one of these subsequent years. The last thing that I will say is that we have kind of a promising indicator in FY21. We got more funding for small recreation access projects. We got $17 million this year. Last year, we got $9 million, and the year before that, we got $5 million. So this is a very positive trend. And when we talk about recreation access, what we're saying is places that are supposedly open to the public for recreation, but there isn't actually recreation access. And so projects that kind of focus on creating access, you know, not just physical access, but also with language and accessibility in the traditional definition, those projects are probably going to get a good look over. So I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it over to Tim, and I will take questions after he's finished. Thank you all.
Thanks, Toby, and good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Tim O'Connell with USDA Rural Development, coming to you live from Sequim, Washington, on the foothills of the Olympic National Forest and Olympic National Park, although I am based in Portland, Oregon. Next slide, please. I'm going to do a little bit of kind of a backtrack because people on the call probably know why Forest Service is part of the recreation economy, but a lot of people kind of go, when they talk about, or they hear rural development is involved. So we're one of 8 mission areas within USDA. Next slide, please. And here's kind of, again, a quick overview of the organization chart at the big level is that we are one of the sub-agencies, as is Forest Service. So they are a sister agency. And it was kind of a natural conclusion to do the outdoor recreation booklet that Toby mentioned earlier. Is it's just a matter of trying to align the resources and the missions that we have. Next slide, please. Within our agency, we have 3 basically funding mechanisms. Just as a background, we are a funding agency. Most of our funding is done in loans and guaranteed loans, but we do have grants as well. But basically, we have 3 buckets of funding: our business programs, which is a business side; housing programs, which is single family and multifamily; and our utilities programs, which is basically community infrastructure, broadband, water. And I'm going to be reviewing some of these just on a broad scale, so we can actually get to the meat of the call today, is to kind of talk about what are the synergies between Forest Service, USDA Rural Development Programming, and our private sector and communities. Next slide, please. We're set up a little bit differently than other federal agencies. We're basically have a state-run agency, 47 state offices. We have over 400 area offices across the U.S., oftentimes co-located with other USDA agencies. Of course, our national office is in Washington, D.C. And at the state level, we're structured in such a way that we have a state director for the 47 offices. We do have some smaller states that are combined. But that state director is a Schedule C, so with the change in administration, we're going to see some changes at the leadership level at our state offices coming in the next couple of months. But we do have career staff that are responsible for the programs, like I mentioned. Generally, we're aligned within the business, the housing, and the utility sections on the program side. So basically, we have a cadre of loan officers across the U.S., loan and grant officers that provide the direct technical assistance and underwriting for the programs that we do deliver. We have a few programs that are delivered at the national level, funding such as utilities, electric, and broadband. And so we do have also what we call GFRs, or general field representatives, that are scattered across the U.S., generally cover 1 or 2 states. And then within the Innovation Center, like myself, next slide, please. We're structured on more of a regional basis, even though we're not a regional organizations like other federal agencies. The Innovation Center is structured on a regional basis. So I am the Western coordinator and cover the 13 Western states, as you saw in that previous slide. But the Innovation Center was developed within this administration as kind of an answer to helping coordinate our 3 funding programs with our communities and our partners. And also to set up, we have a data analytics division that is really looking at data to help drive our decision making, because we've been at this for a very long time. I mean, some of our authority comes from the Great Depression of the 1920s, as far as our programming, utilities, housing, and other things. And so we're looking at to fund where we haven't been or we need to be, and we're using data to do that. And so our data analytics division really helps drive where our investments need to be. The regulations management section, really, it's the old adage, it's hard to go through our regulations because they are so onerous. So we do actually have staff that are trying to simplify those as much as possible. And then the partnerships division for where I work out of is basically here to leverage our resources internally with our external partners, and to make those connections and to make it easier to access the programming. Next slide, please. And this slide is actually outdated. By the time I got it submitted to for this presentation, we came out with our 2020 funding. So we actually have almost a $250 million portfolio now. I've heard anywhere we're between the 5th and the 11th largest bank in the U.S. When you look at our programming for fiscal year 20, we did actually almost $40 billion. And we did this in the middle of a pandemic when we went down, actually our whole agency went virtual in March. And so we're able to do record numbers this year, regardless of where we're located. And just a few of the highlights, our single family housing program, we did 24 billion. Business programs, we did 2 billion. Community facilities, we did 1.5 billion. Telecommunications, we did 1.5 billion as well. So we did a record number of loans and grants for fiscal year 2020, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic. Next slide, please. Quickly going to go over some of the major loan programs that are available and accessible for our recreation economy. First one, our business and industry loan guarantee. This is for rural businesses to specifically provide equipment, machinery, and working capital for any kind of business endeavor. And we've seen this used in a lot of recreation small businesses in our rural areas. It's a guaranteed loan, so we work with the bank. And so it's not our customer is actually the bank in a partnership with the small business or the rural business. Next slide. Another important component of this administration and the upcoming administration is broadband deployment. And I've seen that over and over again in the West where I work out, especially with the recreation economy and with working from home now, that broadband is critical to an infrastructure of the future. And so we're putting a lot of money and time and effort in the funding of and this capacity building of our rural communities in order to get broadband deployed where it needs. And like I said, we did 1.5 billion in 2020 with the authorization that came through. There's other opportunities for future funding for this. Next slide. One of the critical infrastructure needs in rural communities is water and safe drinking water and waste disposal systems. And we're seeing that in a lot of our gateway communities as well. The ones that are partnered with National Park and Forest Service lands is the need to get water infrastructure for clean water and to help protect the environment. And so we do offer loans and grants in this arena for communities to access these funding for clean water and for waste disposal. Next slide. Community facilities is basically what I call our nonprofit financing. It's basically for essential community infrastructure. And we're seeing more and more use for this in our rural gateway and recreation economy areas. But traditionally, we've used it for building hospitals and clinics, roads, as well as fire stations, fire trucks, and basically town halls and libraries. So and also as charter schools. So we've seen a lot of community develop their infrastructure with this funding. And like I said, in 2020, we did about 1.5 billion in funding for this program. Next slide. And of course, housing. That's one of our biggest, it is our biggest portfolio, about, like I said, about 24 billion altogether, primarily in single family guaranteed. So we are one of the primary funders of single family housing in our rural areas. And if you, live and work in the West, and of course, this is my frame of reference, housing is a critical need in our rural areas, especially around our gateway communities, where it's the affordability is becoming an issue, as well as stock. So we do have opportunities moving forward to, I think, help our rural communities with the housing needs. Again, we are a holistic agency, so we're looking at the whole spectrum of community development needs. Next slide. Here's a full list of our programs. Again, we have a whole bunch, 50 plus, ranging from small loans and grants to very large ones. So I guess, like Toby said, one of the important things is just to reach out to a rural development staff person myself. And I also want to give out a shout out to Vince Pommier, who's on the line. He's my co-partner on our internal working group for the recreation economy, and he would be a good contact as well for trying to access our programs. Next slide. So I'm going to go over a few examples of where our funding actually has been specific to our recreation projects. And I'm going to go, basically we have, I think the two biggest programs that we've used to date are our community facilities program on the grant side, and also our rural business development grant program that Toby briefly mentioned on our business side. Just as an FYI, that rural business development grant comes once a year. It's highly competitive. It's run out of the state level, and do believe there's a late February deadline for 2021 funds. And I can follow up at the end of this with a link to that program, and also again to some of the contacts you may need for accessing that. Next slide, please. So the first program there is in community facilities for $175,000 grant. And pardon me, but I'm going to be reading from my phone here exactly what that is. Basically, that program, or this $175,000 grant, was used to help develop a 14-mile stretch of railway bed into a year-round transportation corridor. And it was part of a larger project known as the Lalamio Valley Rail Trail in Upper Vermont. So basically, this funding was able to provide provide access, drainage improvements, vegetation clearing, and redecking of bridges along this trail for the community. In the North Carolina Community Facilities loan, as an example, the first one was a grant. This one was actually a loan to a town in North Carolina to actually purchase land and convert it and access and improve it into a community-owned park. And it was basically located behind an elementary school and a middle school, so it was able to kind of double also as education component for this. So the community was able to access almost a $6 million loan to purchase that and to start upgrading it. Subsequent, and in addition to this, the same community was able to access a water and sewer loan in order to upgrade their water system in order to help support the park. So, and again, this is kind of how the packaging of this goes, is that they're oftentimes not singular projects, but are holistic in how they can be addressed. Next slide, please. Up in Washington State, where I'm located, we're able to do a REAP, which is a Rural Energy for America program for a ski lift, basically to do energy efficiency improvements, basically help improve the operations by helping let's see here, to replace an existing chairlift, and basically to increase energy savings of about 6%, which actually can quite a bit of savings for any kind of a recreation business. On the Nevada Guaranteed Business Loan Program of $2.4 million, basically there was a help to construct a 10,000 square foot 10-room ski lodge and fund a heliport for a helicopter adventure skiers up in Nevada. Next slide. Vermont Community Facilities, a $164,000 grant. Again, this was for the Vermont Land Trust was the applicant to build a 400-foot boardwalk connecting various scenic points in downtown. Also connect downtown to a rail trail. So again, this was a trail project and helping transportation between the communities there. In addition to this, subsequently for the Vermont, same applicant, they were able to, this is a community facilities grant, the $164,000. They were able to get an $89,000 rural business development grant to help plan and do some of the final permitting and design work for this. So they were able to get access to two of our programs for the project. So again, a little bit of an example of a capital stack, even though there was the same agency involved. We've seen a lot of other examples where we use part of our funding to help with the projects that are overall larger. The Michigan Community Facilities Loan of 1.4 million. It's basically to help the community make streetscape improvements in the downtown area, help build sidewalks, pedestrian access. Part of that was their State Department of Transportation put in $381,000 grant. So again, another example of capital stacking is that our loan helped complete the project when other funding wasn't available. And the Ohio Rural Business Development Grant of $79,000 was the Southern Prairie Incubation Center would provide training, technical assistance, and access to capital through a revolving loan fund to help current and startup ventures better manage and successfully market their products and services. So this was specific to the small businesses that are actually part of the recreation economy landscape. So again, just a broad brush stroke of the different programs that have been actually used successfully for recreation type projects. Next slide. Is that the last one? Oh, yeah. It's some, you know, kind of, again, I'm going to spend just a few minutes because I know we're getting running out of time on our formal presentation and want to get into the talking part with you all on the phone and on the computer. But to follow up and kind of tie this together with what Toby was talking about, because the federal land managers in the areas in the West especially are the biggest, you know, the biggest ones in town. And so, you know, housing is an issue. So can we do rural housing on federal lands using our funding with Forest Service lands, as an example? We can do business funding for concessionaires at the forest level and at the National Park Service. Floated in the idea of community-owned and operated visitor and camping facilities. Toby mentioned the Mammoth Lakes project. John, who seems to be getting around, I've met with him. I actually met him in West Virginia a couple of years ago, and we've kept in touch. And he recently contacted me about the Forest Service has a conservation grant program that came out, and Mammoth Lakes was able to access it. So they're doing a conservation finance project to look at how to fund some of the improvements to the camping facilities outside of the Outdoor Recreation Act that Toby mentioned. So we're continuing to look at ways of funding on a private sector basis with federal funding these community-owned facilities. Toby also mentioned the coordinated and community planning with federal land managers, the better route. We're also been in discussions with the Sawtooth National Forest in Idaho, using another federal agency's process, the Economic Development Administration, their Community Economic Development Strategy, or CEDS, and combining that with our the National Forest Service land funding system. So opportunities to coordinate and collaborate there. And again, broadband deployment is a big component of the future. Using federal assets is part of the American Broadband Initiative. And then whatever, I mean, the other is, I guess, the segue into what we're going to be taking on next is the open discussion and questions. So Timothy, I think that's what I'm going to stop here with and turn it back over to you.
Thanks a lot, Tim, and Toby as well. Thank you for the great presentations. And folks, this is the time now where you are all free to either put something in the chat box, or you can also unmute your line and dive right in. I am really excited to hear your thoughts, questions. I thought I might kick just one off myself first for Tim. You mentioned that capital stacking, and also that last slide talking about business funding for concessionaires. Yesterday we heard from some great folks from Maine about some LWCF partnerships that they had had success with, and there was some talk about there may be facilities required to operate a business in a park, but the facilities can't be funded under LWCF. So can rural development programs be used to complement in that area, and how can states think about leveraging these programs when they can't use it, the federal money to match other federal money?
Well, that's you know, one of the things about combining federal funds, and it's tough, but if you take an overall project, say like the park in North Carolina, that purchase, you can chunk it and phase it. So there's many ways of putting these projects together. And I kind of Vince, like I said, he's on the line as well. We both consider ourselves more project developers. So it's a matter of kind of approaching us and figuring out and helping the community figure out what are the ways of doing this. Because again, if you have a business park that can't be funded under the Forest Service programs, maybe rural development can. Or maybe Economic Development Administration, EDA, can fund it because they have a larger grant pool than we do. We're a loan agency, and we spell grants LOANS, quite honestly. But I know a lot of communities can't afford that because you have to have a revenue stream to pay back a loan. But there's other sources of technical assistance, engineering help, the whole 9 yards of putting together a project. So it's important because not all one agency can do it. And that's just the nature of the beast and always has been. Toby, did you want to add anything onto that?
No, I think you made the point very well. And I mean, you guys are really kind of the money end of this program anyway. Forest Service doesn't really have that many grants to give out. But like Tim said, there are creative ways to kind of stack these. And I think in some cases, once you actually pass the money to a non-government agency, sometimes it loses the color of money and you can actually stack them that way. But it depends on the particular grant or loan.
On the line have questions or discussion that they'd like to raise, you can feel free to just jump right in. If not, I can ask some more of my own, which is always fun. Wanted to ask Tim, you mentioned the telecom investments and all the cool things rural development's been able to do. Have you seen any instances where projects were able to stick outdoor rec as kind of an explicit additional area of focus as part of a broadband plan that was developed using the rural development loan?
Well, yeah, actually, this is kind of how these. This is one particular example in John Day, Oregon. It kind of goes back with the federal family of programming and people, because people think of federal government and think that see this get glazed in their eyes, but we're just people on this end. And so John Day, Oregon, which is a small community in Eastern Oregon, has an economic development district, which is part of it, which is an EDA, Economic Development Administration program. And so they were able to get together and they did what they call a REDS, a Regional Economic Diversification Strategy, where they brought in all the federal partners and did basically, this is pre-COVID, of course, did a deep dive on what the needs of John Day, Oregon are. And Forest Service, we had it at the Forest Service building in John Day and brought in all the HUD and all the federal partners. And out of that came, they were able to access Community Connect grant or a Reconnect grant then loan, which is for $6 million for broadband deployment. In addition to that, they were able to get one of the RERC planning and technical assistance projects that Toby mentioned. And so these it fell in line because they had an aggressive community infrastructure that was looking at different federal opportunities and not just at one. So they were able to get $6.5 million reconnect for broadband deployment. They're now finishing up the action plan for the RERC. It's Recreation Economy Rural Communities program. To get basically, it's no money with it, but it's a technical assistance grant. So EPA hired the consultants to run them through it. It was supposed to be in person, but of course we had to pivot to virtual. But that's a good example of where a rural community really stacked some resources. Not happened in 1 year. It's been a while in the making, but they're poised to do great things. And the broadband is going to help with this whole movement to rural areas that have, the working from home type of thing.
East in Alaska. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
question would be with broadband and land water conservation, we have an issue up here where I'd like to see broadband and digital services provided throughout the state here in Alaska, but we try and put infrastructure within a legislatively designated area for recreation. It's called a disposal, and we can't do that without legislative approval and putting cell towers or other stuff. So we're looking for satellite deployment of broadband. The digital infrastructure and ties to feasibility for outdoor recreation is growing more apparent each day. I mean, we have online reservation systems. We're trying to go cashless because we don't want to be counting cash. We want trail maps that people can have on their phones to reduce needs for search and rescue so people can understand where they are in these outdoor areas. What's your vision of how broadband is going to be deployed in more rural areas of the country and having kind of reaching a goal of 100% connectivity where it doesn't matter where you are in a rural area. If we have an online app for reservations or for mapping, it's going to work. So what are your thoughts moving into the future? Is that going to take 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? How's that going to work?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think there's so many technologies, and technology, of course, is advancing. And by any means, I am not a broadband person. I've been dragged in this kicking and screaming because I don't. Look at the gray hair. But it's important to our rural communities, and there isn't a simple answer. And of course, Alaska itself is unique just because of its how spread out it is. But there is a federal agency, National Telecommunications Information Agency, NTIA, and they run Broadband USA. There are all kinds of resources to access. And I might run out of time, but at some point we can get those links to you. And one of the things we're doing in partnership with NTIA is we're doing a broadband capacity building workshop. We've done it previous to COVID in person, and we're doing it right now. Virtual. We're planning some workshops for Arizona to basically bring rural communities the capacity building they need to start asking the questions that you asked that I don't have an answer for in this segment. But there's mapping out there, there's programs out there, there's ISPs, internet service providers out there. The matter of, like Toby said, it's a partnership of trying to solve resources because communities can't do it by themselves. We need to do it on a regional and a holistic basis with federal, state, local, and private resources. So that's the best answer.
And I'll jump in here, Ricky. I'm putting in the chat just for everybody's benefit. NGA, Center for Best Practices, did some work on broadband earlier in 2020, and we ended up putting out a paper on governor's solutions. And so Matt and I both had the privilege of helping out with that a little bit. We're more than happy to follow up with anybody who's interested in talking about that more. Wanted to give a question to Toby real quickly as we're kind of winding down on time. Toby, you mentioned on one of your slides that one of the related to the 2012 planning rule, key to success being collaborations between the Forest Service and state governments, among other groups. Wanted to know if you had any specific examples for folks on the line of ways that's gone well between the Forest Service and state governments that they can be thinking about.
Well, we actually started engaging in a process, I believe we started in 2019, that we're calling shared stewardship. And of course, that had a definition before our definition, but the way that we are approaching it is by signing joint agreements with the states on how we manage our forests. And so we do have those direct connections now. I think we have, I want to say 27 states are already signed up and have shared stewardship agreements. Again, this was an initiative under this administration, so I don't know if those will go the way of the dodo next year, but they seem to have been, bearing some pretty good fruit. I was on a temporary assignment as the rec director for Arizona and New Mexico in February of this year through June. And obviously those states are very different politically, but both of them had great interest in these agreements. And New Mexico had their agreement already signed. I think Arizona's is already signed, but they're looking at amending it. And so these agreements actually provide an institutionalized kind of formalized mechanism for this type of work. And it's not just about recreation, it's kind of all of the different things that we do on land management, but recreation certainly finds its way in. It's one of the main emphases on the New Mexico agreement. And I think Arizona was working it into their agreement. And so a lot of, what goes into that agreement has to do with the needs of the state in terms of what kind of resource management issues they want to be involved in. But for several of them, it has been very heavy on the rec side.
Thank you. And I apologize, I missed in the chat, Aaron, I believe, had a follow-up question related to the Vermont project. Aaron, I don't know if you want to unmute and go ahead and ask what you'd like to hear more about.
Yeah, I was just curious if we were, I know yesterday you guys were doing a good job tracking like follow-up links and stuff, and I would be curious to hear about how John Day, Oregon funded the REDS process, or what the REDS process is, the Recreation Economic Diversity Strategy, I think is what Tim mentioned. And then, yeah, a link to the Vermont example. Steph mentioned that she had sent something to a different work team that I'm involved with on that, but I will follow up on that. But specifically the community facilities piece is what I'm very interested in sharing with our land trusts here in Montana.
Yeah, okay. Basically, I think I just threw out too many acronyms that start with R. So the RERC, which is the Recreation Economy for Rural Communities, that's the EPA Forest Service initiative on planning. The REDS, which is it's the Regional Economic Diversification Strategy, is an EDA, Economic Development Administration-led effort. And it's also planning, but it's a coordination effort that they do, so there's no funding involved with that. It's just a matter of contacting EDA, and they're set up, if I was president, first thing I'd do is just make all federal agencies have the same darn region, because we're all over the board. Because EDA has a different region than the Forest Service has a different region, and USDA Rural Development has a different region. So the Seattle Regional Office covers some states, and anyway, and I can actually be the conduit for the REDS process as well that John Day went through. And then the community facilities, basically it's our loan and grant program that finances infrastructure. And I can put that in a link in the chat box, but it's also one of the links in my PowerPoint presentation. If you go to all programs, go to community facilities, you'll find that. And, basically what we like to share is success stories, and we didn't get a deep enough dive into that, but there's ways of looking at a project that won't fit yours exactly, but might ping an idea. And I think that's what we're trying to do with Toby and I, is to ping those ideas to think outside the box. So we can be, because we're trying to put innovation in the government with the Innovation Center, and thinking outside the box on doing some of these programming.
Thanks. Yeah, I was mostly looking for more information on the Vermont project, but I will try to follow Steph's.
Well, yeah,
I definitely have the link to community facilities generally. When I have those conversations with community facilities folks here, we just haven't really got. So I want to do more sleuthing about how people have connected the dots on community facilities.
Yeah, I put you in contact with our Northeast people that can put you in. People who know people, right? That's what we do.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. And I emailed you during this presentation, Tim, so you've got my contact.
Okay. Yeah, and I welcome, and I think Toby's the same way. Just feel free to reach out via email or phone if you need some introductions or.
Yeah. So, in general, for the whole network, there's this whole alphabet soup of programs out there. It's very confusing what goes to what, and we're talking about capital stacking and pulling a bunch of different programs in, not necessarily for match, but maybe doing different phases or different parts of a project. For our network in general, what is your advice to them for how to figure this all out in the most easy, expeditious way?
Call Toby.
Oh, that's not fair.
I
think that's the point. I think if it were easy and expeditious, every town would already have their rec economies. And I think it's just kind of a function of the way that our government has evolved. And we are sort of the first to do a lot of things. And we stand on tradition quite a bit. And so like Tim said, a lot of the regulations that we have on the books now date back to the 1920s and 30s. Our agency is from 1905, and we still have a lot of the original things. And so I think the easiest way to navigate those things is to have a contact within the agencies that can match you with the grants or business services that are appropriate for the kind of work that you're trying to do. And so I will say that I don't think there's any easy way, but I think that the way to make it easier is to have a person who can kind of hold your hand through the process as you're deciding which services to apply.
Yeah, so you mentioned, I mean, Tim mentioned that there's a rural development office in every single state. Is that, I mean, is that the contact that you would go to go, okay, I don't know about all these different programs. I don't know which every single one and which was going to fit to the thing that we want to do. But is that the first person that they should be contacting to go, okay, here's the idea we want to get done. Can you tell us?
That or, you know, sometimes some of the state websites only have a phone number, and sometimes we're all over the board on that. So again, there's myself, there's Vince on the chat in the audience as well, Toby. And also I want to flag Steph Barantania from EPA too, who's heavily involved. I see her face and waving. She'd be a good contact because, you know, USDA Rural Development actually helped review some of the applications on the RERC because we have a financing background, and we do loans and grants. We've been doing it for, well, almost a century now, not me personally, but agency. But it's, I think we're all starting to know each other's enough to pass information on to the right people. So it's quicker to get to the right person.
Okay.
So there's just a whole bunch of different ways to access.
All right, and so we will send your information off with our takeaways from this session, but also, do you have a list of rural development state offices? Is that a link somewhere that we could get from you?
Yep, we do.
Okay. The contacts.
Well, thanks. Okay. Thanks very much, Tim and Toby. I'm going to put a little clap reaction in the meeting here for you. This has been fantastic. Really appreciate all of your insights here, and folks, please just either get in touch with them or come through us, and we'll do our best to connect you if anybody has ways that we can be more helpful on this subject. So thanks again, Toby and Tim, and I will turn it back over to Bevan and Matt to roll onwards.